I'm excited to be back for another live stream and have a returning guest with me. And so running a little bit behind, but doing a little catch up behind the scenes. So Mr. Joe Bowman, he's a writer. He's a traveler. He's one that's very knowledgeable on what's going on. And today I'm very excited because you're currently in Argentina. And the last time we spoke, you were in Colombia. So you're on the move. So I want to get your thoughts on what you're seeing down there as well as overall picture. But Joe, how are you doing first and foremost?
Thanks for having me on. Just up front, Mike, I really appreciate returning. I remember having a good conversation with you last time, so thanks a lot for having me back. I have been on the move, I guess, not as much as I'd like to, though. In the last couple of weeks, Argentina's gone more or less on total lockdown. I think it was probably one of the more aggressive states with regards to imposing quarantine and travel restrictions, both domestic and from international flights. So we've been indoors now for, I think, going on about 3 weeks. And, for those of us who have kids at home and who are, trying to get work done, that's, that presents a whole bunch of different challenges and or opportunities, depending on how you see it.
Yeah.
So all good. We're happy and healthy, and I hope your listeners are doing likewise.
Right. Appreciate you. So I want to get your thoughts on, so we're going to break it into segments today. So I want to get your thoughts on all the monetary, the health, and all that stuff from March. And given that we're in the beginning of April, I want to get your thoughts on what you anticipate and expect for April. And then let's look beyond April as to what possibly might come in the future, which of course we don't know, but let's play through some scenarios. So let me get your synopsis on what has happened thus far with the release of this health situation. Some people say it's a bio weapon. Some people say it's a natural occurrence. So there's different perspectives. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. And then the response from all the governments in regards to easing stimulus and whatever else you might know about.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of talk about, you mentioned bioweapon. There's been a lot of rhetoric, geopolitical rhetoric, back and forthing of, who caused this and what were the potential motivations for it. I think that in and of itself is an interesting conversation, but it's not necessarily a helpful conversation to people who are living through this. So, whether this was, whatever the motivations for this, for this coming along, if there were indeed any motivations, the fact of the matter is we still have to deal with it as it is.
Yeah.
So, we're citizens living in the United States or in Argentina, Colombia, wherever we happen to be, we still have to kind of deal with the fallout on an individual and family and community level. So, so I think that's probably what I think is more interesting to focus on, because that's kind of the reality on the ground for most people. So, the safety and security of their family, their financial security. I know a lot of people have seen, just large portions of their retirement funds, for example, have been under huge amounts of pressure. And it looks, most markets, and these figures will be rough because it's a broad statement, but most markets are down somewhere in the vicinity of 25-30%. Extreme markets down even further. Some of those in Europe. So yeah, it's been a really tough jolt to the system. It's been interesting watching the different governments' reactions to this. I mentioned earlier that Argentina, the Argentine government under Alberto Fernandez, he kind of took what I guess would be considered a relatively aggressive approach quite early on with regard to the infection rate down here. So I was looking at this just a couple of days ago. If I recall, it was somewhere in the vicinity of 150 or so known cases here in Argentina. And of course, it could be some multiple higher than that because of access to testing and so forth. But by any measure, it was a fairly low incidence of known cases when the government basically enacted a full-scale lockdown of both domestic travel, incoming flights, first of all from Europe and certain parts of Eastern Asia, and then from the United States, and shortly thereafter, it was basically mandatory quarantine. I mean, we can go outside to, go to the pharmacy if you have a prescription or if you need to do grocery shopping, but it's not, it's not like people are in the park or at restaurants, as is usually the case down here at this time of year. So it's interesting to contrast that with, some of the reactions of other governments, which were potentially a little slower to bring in those kinds of, some would say, draconian decrees and laws. So I don't know. It's interesting because we've got basically just a full scale global experiment playing out in real time, and for most of us, I mean, unless we're 110 years old plus, we haven't seen anything like this in our life. So it's a very dynamic situation, very, very complicated.
Yeah, I imagine the monetary issues that were already underlying all this prior to this emergency event, which causes central banks now to have to respond in a way that I always anticipated, as the debt monetary system would probably come towards an end. I think we're at that point now. So how do you think, and what type of measurements do you see the continuation of central banks dropping rates, easing, stimulus, and all the things that will come at the end of a monetary cycle, or is this their public appearance of trying to keep this thing going? What do you think? Are they gearing us for something else, or are they just trying to get as much life out of they can out of this system at this current point?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think in a nutshell, they have only really one tool, and that's it's inflate or die. That's kind of the situation right now, and it's difficult to see when you look at, say, the strength of the dollar index in, as we're talking through March, let's say, we saw the dollar rally only relative to other currencies, which were getting hit even harder. So, if you're looking at the dollar next to the yen or the euro or the yuan, yeah, of course it looked strong, but you can never really quote the price of something without it being relative to something else. And we saw other assets, for example, gold performed quite well at the beginning of March, if I recall. It's come off quite a bit since then on the in official terms, although it's from reports that I get on the street, still hard to get your hands on physical metal to take ownership of that, which is I guess more indicative of what the real price would kind of be. And not something that's a representative of a derivative of a claim on a paper of, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it looks like, that we're going to see the same bag of tricks. This is a catalyzing event, I think, that will provide all the cover and all the excuses that central bankers need to do what they do best, and that is to destroy the fiat currency in which their citizens price their own wealth and well-being. So I think we're going to see an acceleration of this, and perhaps the most worrying part of it all is that it's going to be welcomed with open arms by people who, were they not in a crisis situation, and were they not in a time of duress and were they not under such pressure, would probably have looked askance at some of these unprecedented measures and sort of scratched their heads and thought, hang on a second, that's going a little far. But because of the nature of the circumstances, in times of war, in times of panic, in times of market meltdowns, people grab at anything they can, and unfortunately, central bankers know that all too well, and they're only too happy to take any excuse they can to do what they do best.
Yeah. Now, do you think the economic stimulus payment that is being rolled out here in the U.S., and I'm assuming, I know Argentina was already in a recession well before now, and so is there any payments coming to Argentinian citizens in that form type of measurement, and also give us your thoughts on this economic stimulus payment that's coming, this initial, $1,200 per adult and $500 a kid, and give me your thoughts on that. Is that kind of the things you're talking about? People will probably become used to now. given the dire circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say. I know that different countries have rolled out their own version of decorating the Christmas tree with either relief targeted at certain sectors of the economy, be it the hospitality industry, let's say, or the aviation sector, or what have you in the general economy. Other governments have gone for a more direct approach where they've tried to put money directly into individual citizens' hands. We have corporate bailouts, for example, although they certainly won't call it that, but subsidies for industries that are really under the pump right now in these trying times. So it's difficult to address stimulus in general because it comes in so many different varieties.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that we can probably say is that if governments know how to do anything, it's to misallocate resources in a market, because at precisely the time that the market needs price signals and as pure information as it can get with regard to profit incentives and et cetera, this is precisely the time that the government comes in and fogs up the scene. So right when you need a sniper, the central banker will come in with a smoke machine, and everything gets distorted, everything gets hazy, and it's really, really difficult to determine where resources need to be allocated. And so I think it's going to be really, really tough to see our way out of here. I think.
Yeah. Now, what are your thoughts on as a part of this stimulus program? I believe they're going to be issuing some type of new payment mechanism in the form of a digital currency. And so the Federal Reserve recently came out saying that they're looking at trying to find ways to utilize this technology of just basically rebranding the digital system and making it more centralized. I'm assuming bringing the Fed and Treasury together. And so do you think that this is one of those steps that's going to take us closer to that unified push for the central bank digital currencies?
Yeah,
I think in the end of paper currency. Sorry about that.
No, for sure. I mean, it really is kind of the perfect storm for central bank intervention, because as I was mentioning before, with all the different the different excuses that they're going to be able to use, one of them, and some of them have some at least semblance of truth to them. So it is a fact that if you have a virus like this one that is kind of making its way around the globe right now, it is healthier and less contagious not to have to deal with paper currencies. And so you can easily see how the government comes along and says, well, you were doing this for your own good, and we're doing it to help fight the pandemic, and now we're going to corral you all into this digital currency that at the flick of a switch we'll be able to debit your account or suspend your account, or you can just imagine. I mean, even in the best of times, if we're governed by benevolent angels, you can foresee problems with that kind of centralization of the planet's monetary system. And it's last I checked, we were not governed by benevolent angels. So if this falls into even borderline nefarious hands, you can easily imagine that like a kind of Handmaid's Tale type dystopia, where all of a sudden you get to the cashier and your account has been suspended, and your cards don't work, and it's because of some conduct that they've been able to trace that they were not in agreement with, not dissimilar to what we were. I think last time you and I were speaking about the credit score, the social credit score in China, and that's you can easily. It doesn't take a whole lot of imagination. Much less paranoia to imagine that kind of dystopia evolving out of this this situation.
And one of the things is Mr. Bill Gates has mentioned about the need for a national tracking database or national database, and somebody in the chat referenced that there's some type of virus location app or something. So no doubt it's going to be a push to try to curtail everybody towards one central databasing platform that you might get, your payments from, your credit score from. So that whole thing seems like it's something that's possible. And then you factor in the surveillance aspect of, keeping track of everybody via the closed caption TV and things of that nature. So I think we might resemble a lot of what's going on in Asia or in China, rather, as this thing unwinds, because a lot of people love to mention that, the government never lets a good opportunity go to waste, such as this, to further expand themselves into our lives.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's, especially during gaslight us into what it perceives the new reality that's most helpful to its own system. But recalls to mind, for example, passports during the two world wars. Previous to the First World War, you could pretty much walk over any border in Europe, and it was not really such a big deal. And then, of course, with the war and the war efforts by the government, they started implementing what at that time was the new technology of having to carry photographed passports when you went across border. And of course, these were temporary measures designed to fight the foreign enemy and in the service of the common good, et cetera, all the usual tropes. But it's interesting to note that temporary measures during a time of crisis are rarely, if ever, rolled back after that crisis passes. So I think some of the things that we're seeing aggressively implemented by governments around the world to a largely unquestioning citizenry are not temporary measures. This is in many ways going to resemble the new normal, and so people have to be very, very careful about what they okay at this point, because this is going to be the future. Whether this pandemic is resolved in the next few months or the next few years, or it's something that's with us for much longer than that. We do have to start thinking about not just getting to the other side of this, but what kind of world we want to live in when we do get to the other side of this. What indeed is worth preserving, and I would suggest potentially civil liberties are among our most hard-won rights that we ought to be standing up for.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious to get your thoughts, because in Argentina, I years ago lived there, so very familiar with how close knit and community focused Argentinians happen to be, especially when you're outside of Buenos Aires and the smaller cities. They gather together frequently, and so I imagine the social distancing of rules apply there as well. And so here in the same way. Now, do you see citizens in general around the world continuing to stick to the idea of separating themselves physically from family, friends, without there being some type of, say, I'm not sick, my family's not sick, let's go hang out, and they start breaking the recommended laws of keeping yourself indoors, to where we end up seeing some type of social unrest eventually, of people not being able to get out and about, and they go out looking for food. Because I know Argentina is a lot different than here, where we can go to supermarkets and stock up for a while. In Argentina, most places you can't do that. So what are your thoughts?
Right. Yeah, most people in Argentina would be very happy to have in their refrigerator what is just sort of a Thursday grocery run for the average American. So
yeah.
You guys are generally pretty well stocked by comparison, and that's probably a good thing. But yeah, to your point about there being a growing restlessness, I'd say, within the citizenry itself, it's not natural to be locked down like this, to return to kind of, Plato's cave and be just, watching the shadows on the wall. It is disconcerting. And actually here in Argentina, you would probably remember from your time down here, one of the common means by which people protest is they go out onto their balconies and they bang their casserole dishes, pots and pans. It's called a cacerolazo. And basically it's a way for the citizenry to vent their spleen at whatever topic is, kind of trending at the moment, be it corruption or, this or that football team lost, more likely. But we've noticed just here in my building at 9 o'clock every night, the whole city, there's 15 odd million people here in Argentina's capital. 15 million people head out to their balcony at 9 o'clock every evening and join in a unified applause for the medical workers, nurses, doctors, frontline people who are doing such an incredible job. A few nights ago, we noticed that there was a second wave of clapping and applause and general protest, actually. And so I asked a few of my local friends here, and it turns out that the 9:30 clap now is the city unified behind a demand for politicians to take a meaningful pay cut, along with the distress that the citizens themselves are experiencing. So we have calls for 50% pay cuts for politicians across the board, and then there are also protests of, I guess, what you would call the unintended consequences of a mandatory lockdown. And it's all well and good to implement this or that policy, but it gets back to what Bastiat spoke about and what Hazlitt elucidated a couple of centuries later, and that's the unintended consequences, the unseen consequences of what your policies are. And here, tragically, while the country has had a relatively small number of deaths due to the coronavirus, since mandatory quarantine, there's been a non-trivial spike in domestic violence resulting in murder. So that's one thing that people don't consider. That it's all well and good to say, well, let's all just stay home and we'll wait for this thing to pass. But there aren't a lot of people, and certainly here in Argentina there are less people who can just check out for a month or 2 months at a time, rely on savings and just sit at home and watch Netflix or whatever. People need to go out and work. They need to earn a living. Crops need to be harvested. Grapes need to be picked. Cattle needs to be herded. There's still cogs that need to turn in the economy. Otherwise, people who are living at the very lowest socioeconomic threshold their livelihoods are very, very fragile at this moment. So it has to be a really balanced approach. And I think going too far extreme to either side, with complete sort of cavalier ambivalence on the one end, and then what would maybe call sort of draconian, mandatory, Mad Max style enforcement on the other. On the other hand, neither of them seem particularly well thought out or helpful for those who need it the most.
Yeah. I'm curious, and so somebody made reference here. I'm going to put two pieces in this question. It says, does each state have the power to repatriate gold and silver as money? So I'm assuming he's referring to here in the 50 states. And so we've had more states now look to pass some legislation basically removing the taxation off of metals, returning it back to its official legal status of being money in and of itself. So do you see something like that being rolled out by certain states in the days ahead? And then on the gold and silver side down in Argentina, I don't recall seeing many stores where you can actually go acquire gold or silver. I'm not sure about Buenos Aires. So give us the two thoughts there.
Yeah, so I think for the first, to the point about the United States government, either I see a Bitcoin Ben.
Bitcoin Ben, super chat there. Appreciate you, my friend.
Generous Bitcoin Ben, good man. Yeah, so to the point about what the states in the US can and can't do, I always look back at the action. I think it was, you'll know this, I'm sure, Mike, but better than I do it. Was it the 1932 act in which FDR essentially confiscated
30. I think it's 33 executive order.
33 executive order.
0, something like that.
Yeah. And so I always find it interesting that people pine for and maybe correctly a return to a gold standard, and I think that's historically that has been a prudent safeguard against runaway government profligacy. But we do have to remember that we're not dealing with an honest actor when it comes to the state. So if the state decides that it's in its own interest to go ahead and confiscate that, there we go, 6102,
yeah.
So 33, you're right. So if the state decides that it's in our interest to go ahead and require that that individual citizens turn their metals, gold and silver, over to the state, and if lockboxes at post offices have to be open in the presence of an IRS agent, as I understand it was during the 30s, then they'll do that. I mean, what's to stop them, right? So. Yeah. I think the last safeguard for people who are looking to protect some wealth, I think crypto is, depending on where you're in. I know that's a big complicated subject that's probably worth a whole other discussion, but you want to have something beyond the reach of the state. That becomes increasingly difficult, but I think the technology of crypto makes that more difficult than say having gold in a lockbox. And just to preempt any of your audience who are gold bugs and who think that I'm talking down against the metals, I'm a huge fan of gold. It's not a case of either or for me. I think it's a case of you want some gold, you want some crypto, you want some diversification. But certainly probably the dollar isn't the best place to be long term, nor any fiat currency for that matter.
Yeah. Now speaking of which, and so since Mr. Bitcoin being here, he's one of the guys I work with we do videos during the weekend, and so he's a good guy. He's Bitcoin Ben, and so I'm sure he would love to ask you this question. From what you've gathered, how has the cryptocurrency been received in Argentina? And so we know they've gone through currency issues forever. I was attempting to educate some of my friends down in the southern part about it. So how has it been received in the capital area?
With open arms. I mean, obviously it's been a highly volatile ride, and that's just the nature of cryptocurrency. It's the nature of all kind of nascent and disruptive markets. For it, you wouldn't expect smooth sailing with any technology that seeks to disrupt and disintermediate large, coddled, entrenched, systems that are in place, like central banking, for example. So yeah, you would expect there to be a pretty bumpy ride. But on the whole, I would say I found out first about crypto. I was living in Argentina. I think it was late 2010. I want to say maybe early 2011. And at the time, the Argentine government or the Argentine Peso had broken away. We used to say broken away from reality, because there's both what you call an official and an unofficial rate for exchange. And when those two rates separate, and they usually do because of capital controls, whereby the Argentine government puts certain restrictions on purchasing foreign currency or precious metals, or essentially hedging their bets against the predictable demise of the local fiat, being the peso. During those times when capital controls ramp up, you see a big spread open up between the official and the unofficial rate of exchange for a peso to, say, dollars or euros. So at the time in 2011 and all the way through sort of 2015, 16, when I moved to Mexico for a while, the spread between the official and the unofficial rate had reached extraordinary levels. So it was, I think I recall, sort of 40 or 50% difference, which is astronomical. But interestingly enough, crypto was always priced in the unofficial rate. So crypto was always priced to reality, where even the government's own money was not priced to reality. And I thought that and by reality, I mean just literally what you could get for offer and supply, in a voluntary market exchange. That would be the fair price. So even what the government was advertising as the value of its own currency was completely detached from what exchange rates were offering on the street. But people who were operating in the crypto space knew exactly what the value of the peso was relative to crypto, relative to US dollars. And so it was just interesting to notice that, the word fiat, as I'm sure your listeners are well aware, means essentially by decree, value by decree. So it was interesting to note that, even the highest laws in the land could not by decree impart value onto something that ordinary citizens knew was not worth what they said it was worth. But actual value, as was transferred through crypto or through gold, that always gets priced to market, and that's a more honest price, I think.
Yeah. So as you were speaking, I've looked up the current value of $1 USD to the Argentina peso, and it's 64 pesos for $1. And I remember when I was there last, I think it was 2015, it was just at 1 to 8, 8 to 1. And then with a couple weeks later, it's 15 to 1. And then I remember mentioning a year ago how by the end of last year, it was going to be 60 to 1, hands down, on its way to 100 pretty soon. And so for those that may not really understand the evaluation that took place in that little small frame of time, share with us what 64 pesos in comparison to what the US dollar could do here and do there. Give us some of the distinctions there.
Sure. That's a great question, but let me just say, just because I'm looking at that screen that you shared there, 64.7. Okay. So
that's official.
So just to underscore the point that I was making, we've seen this spread open up again recently. So if you look at, let's say dollar blue, that's DOLAR space BLUE. If you just type that in there, and you'll blue DOLAR, just one, dollar blue OY HOY is like the 5th or 6th one down there.
HOY.
Yeah, there you go. Top result there, and you'll see what the unofficial rate is paying on one of those pages. There will show. Okay,
I remember seeing Venezuela's their whatever page they have.
Right.
So I'll let that load up. But anyway,
so that'll probably be something like 70, 75, 78, something like that. I think it got to 80 recently.
Let me see here. I got no gracias. Some advertisement here. I don't know. I'll find another official page. This does look like it's a good source. I'll just go back.
So that's an official one. Yeah. So the official will be something like 65. The unofficial rate will be more in the vicinity of 75, maybe 80. And that spread's blowing out again now. So, well, there you go. Okay. So comprar to buy, and then venta obviously to sell. So they're selling at 83.5 now. So it's gone up since I last looked at it just a couple of days ago. So for your listeners can see there the spread between the official rate of 65 and the unofficial rate of somewhere, you're looking at something like 80 there. As the average between those. So that's obviously a significant arbitrage opportunity for people who are looking at that kind of thing. But so to your question about what does $1, be it 64 pesos or 80 pesos, what does $1 buy down here in Argentina? It's still a relatively inexpensive place to go out and get a good steak and a bottle of wine, provided of course that you can leave your house, which is not the case at the moment. But I'd say a comfortable lunch for two people with a bottle of wine and appetizers and a couple of good steaks, you're probably looking at something like $10 or $15 for the check, including tip, and that's at a reasonably nice place. So I return to Australia, my country of birth, every so often, every year or so, and I'm always shocked to see what people pay for for a fairly standard no frills lunch in various parts of the world. And it always reminds me why I'm happy to live here.
Yeah, I remember years ago, like, or as of today, a family of 3 or 4 going out to dinner somewhere decent, like your TGI Friday or something like that, is $60, $70. And I remember years ago with my family going out and the bill was less than $20 for the same meal, a better quality and everything else. And of course, the beef is unbelievable there. So
That's right.
yeah, good old days.
Good old days.
Oh man.
Well,
So go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, just reminiscing about time out of doors and looking forward to the return of the cafe culture.
Exactly, I understand. So, Joe, as we get ready to wind things down, let's look ahead as to what we might see in a futuristic standpoint as this blows over. Of course, time frame for this whole health situation, no one knows, but we anticipate the governments expanding themselves and invading our lives a little bit more. Do you see a concerted global effort by all central banks to now use this health situation that they're all facing as a way to join forces to lead us towards one type of world currency, world government, or create more entities where they're going to collab together in the best interest of humanity?
Right. I'm always torn on that those kind of questions, because on the one hand, it's difficult for me to imagine an evil in which states would not rush to collude and partake in, and history bears a sad and sorry testament to that fact. On the other side, it's difficult for governments to get together to cooperate on just about anything. So it's kind of the tension between evil and incompetence. And I'm not sure which one wins out at the end of the day. I'd like to, I live here in Argentina, so I voluntarily choose to throw my hat in with inept governments that are just, as opposed to somewhere like China, where they say, like, hey, everyone's staying home and everyone's getting this social credit score and this is happening, and whether you like it or not, that efficient governments scare me. I like to be in what some might call the Wild West, where they're too busy chasing their own tails to worry about small fish like us.
Interesting. Well, once again, Joe, for those that might want to keep tabs and see what type of work you're doing, type of writing you're doing, is there a place we can direct them so they can stay in tune with what you have going on?
Well, right at the moment, I'm probably the next conversation that you and I have. I'll have some news, hopefully, for your listeners about a new project that I'm working on. It's kind of in the final or maybe penultimate stages right now, but I hope to have some more information next time we chat, and maybe that'll be when you're visiting Argentina down here in person.
Definitely. Now, how about your Twitter? Are you active on Twitter?
I don't tweet. I don't
tweet. Okay.
No.
Fair enough. Well, good deal. So we'll definitely connect again. And so depending on how all this stuff lasts, I'd love to have you back on and get your thoughts on where we're at and what's happening down in your neck of the woods. And so go from there. But everybody, thank you for tuning in to this afternoon Q&A session. Hope you guys enjoyed yourself. If you've enjoyed it, don't be afraid to donate a thumbs up and then share this video so other people can find out what's going on from a different perspective other than the mainstream narrative. And then be back at it later on today for some more live streaming. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Joe, once again.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it, man.